of procurement rules in order to timely expend federal and state funds. Let's go ahead and start with a roll call, please.
Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Ms. Allard? Mr. Constant?
Mr. Constant is excused.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy?
Here.
Ms. LaFrance?
Here.
Mr. Presverdia? Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Ms. Zolotel?
Ms. Zolotel is excused.
Thank you.
All right, as usual, if members want to get in the queue, please put yourself in the chat or text me if you can't access the chat. All right, I'll go ahead and turn it over to the sponsors for the presentation.
I'll do the talking, and Suzanne will do the flipping through the PowerPoint. See how that goes. So we've seen this before. This is our an S version reworking this, and it hasn't really changed the intent, but we've gotten I think to a place where it functions a little bit better. And broadly, this is under the category if we take emergency orders and bring them into ordinance, and this is slightly different, but in that same spirit. And it also brings, there's within code where the mayor can skip procurement process when it's needed for health, safety, and welfare. But I think it's always important to have the assembly, who really has control over the budget, have some part in any of those kind of routines. So this puts us into there, into that budget and spending, where I think we should always have a role. And this also, anytime that quick spending is important, in an emergency or some other situation might require haste, and this would prevent the need to do an emergency proclamation just to achieve that goal of kind of bypassing purchasing and getting things done quickly. Emergency, as we know, emergency proclamation should be a real extreme, and this lets us kind of get things done quickly when needed without having that. So I think you can go flip through there, Suzanne. I think this
Actually,
just
John, real quick, John, this is Suzanne. I couldn't pull it up, and so Jennifer is actually doing the flipping.
Oh, okay. Good, perfect. Jennifer, thank you. So this repeats some of the whereases, and I think we've hit that. So go ahead and flip it, Jennifer. Okay. So we changed the line. The first line there is just to say expedited procurements so it doesn't just relate to emergencies. That's pretty simple. Thanks. Go ahead. This, in current code is just for health, safety, and welfare. And one of the things we've seen when we dealt with the CARES Act and so on, that timeliness is important too. So that's one of the key features in this. Let's go ahead and flip. So we added this, and this really just augments number one. Number one is just for health, safety, and welfare reasons, but this also allows when the mayor gives the mayor power to, speed procurement when time is an issue. Okay, go ahead. Then we put ourselves in the game here a bit too, and this is to allow suspension of procurement rules when federal or state funds, kind of the intent is that they be spent quickly. And that's something that we've seen in now, like our meeting this evening, perhaps, and certainly the CARES Act funds, where we want to get money out quickly. There's some kind of economic crisis, and we want to get, those gift cards to people quickly, or rent assistance out there very quickly. And that's the intent of the program, even if there's not a deadline that they have to be spent by. So this would open the door for that. And then the next one, Jennifer. And then we added this as well, or this was in the original one, and and this would essentially, if we face a deadline, like we did with the CARES Act funds, where they were supposed to be by the end of last year, it would say, okay, well, there's certainly be times if it's November and we have money to be spent by the end of December, we need to get it out the door quickly. And this allows us for that purpose to skip purchasing. I think one more. And this requires a report when this is done. And it's important that, I think there's good reasons that we have. Does Dean want to chat? Sorry, I'm getting pings on my other phone. I will let Dean address some points when I'm done, which is in a moment. And this is, I think the procurement rules that we have can be slow, but there's a good reason for them, is we want to make sure that money is properly expended and there's no favoritism in the spending and so on. So this report would be basically to tell us, why was it done more quickly? And then who is the beneficiary, to make sure that that's very overt. And I think that's about it. Is there one more, Jennifer? And this is...
One more, John.
There are, okay.
11 pages.
There's 11. Well, Meg really got on it. Meg made this, and Jennifer's flipping and I'm talking. Okay, so this, I think is just, do we just move things around to different sections? Like Dean could perhaps address that. So I want to, Felix, could Dean speak? He's texting me on my other phone, and I want to make sure I'm not skipping him.
Sure, happy to have Mr. Gates speak, and want to note for the record we've been joined by Ms. Howard. Go ahead, Mr. Gates.
Okay, thank you. And yes, I guess I wanted to speak to this in creating the S version, and we recognize that some of what we wanted to do here is addressed here in current code. So this section is marked for repeal, but we're not really changing anything in substance. This language is really moved up, and a couple slides before, I think it's in section A2, really tracks the language of this section very, very precisely. So yeah, I guess number 2. Thank you. So this about the mayor waiving and writing the formal procedures when time is of essence and best interest of the municipality. Those key phrases are the same as that section we're repealing. So we're really just moving the language up here. It actually makes more sense for the code and someone who's reading the code, because the 2 sections were kind of several sections apart, and a reader might overlook the later one. So we put the emergency and expedited procurement exceptions here in one section. It doesn't really change anything in substance. This is already currently allowed. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, and that this is in the S version. So some people might be scratching their heads. It's not in the original AO, so the S version will be on the addendum. You can go back to that slide, I guess. Thank you.
There. Thank you, Dean. That was very helpful. Okay, can we flip to the next one then? There's our conclusion. Yeah, basically it lets us spend money when we need to quickly and kind of meet the intent of the funds if we get federal and state funds, and then but also kind of retaining through the report, control over who gets what and understanding of where the money's going. Is there another one, Jennifer? There you go. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions? Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not so much a question as just to add, and thank you, John, for going through that. That we've seen how the sudden end of the state's emergency declaration, for example, made it difficult for some services to continue, and identifying what we may need past the emergency or transitioning out. And obviously this has broader application potentially, but in this particular case, we have this opportunity to have a smoother transition as well. And I think the point about flexibility and agility that John pointed out is very important, and a big driver to these proposed code changes. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm inclined to support this for a lot of reasons that I think I've expressed in the past in terms of the ability that we don't have when we're in some of these situations. But I know Mr. Weddleton talked about the idea of, this obviously could have negative implications for spending money too rapidly, maybe inefficiently, or showing some kind of bias or favoritism or something to whoever would get a contract. But anyway, maybe that's the only downfall to this. And not that those aren't significant potential downfalls, but anyway, I guess I'm just looking to see if there are any other loophole problems here, things that we think could be a problem with this. I don't know what kind of feedback maybe you've gotten from purchasing or anybody else, but anyway, just wondered if there were other concerns out there that this could potentially cause. Thanks.
Thanks. I'll let the sponsors respond, and then if anyone from the administration wants to respond, please put yourself in the queue. So any of the sponsors would like to speak?
Yeah, those are really good points, and I think are major concerns that the purchase is done well. Are we getting a good deal, and so on? So this would be, hopefully used very rarely, and we'd have to justify it when we, when we do our resolution to skip purchasing. And we're talking about federal or state funds that would be presumably like grants and so on. But so those are important, and I believe we're okay, but it does depend on getting good reports and then being careful when it's used. We did send this to purchasing. Ron Haddon is out of the office for a while, and we have not heard back from purchasing. So if there's someone from the administration, I would definitely like to hear from them on this. Thanks.
Thanks. It sounds like Mr. Haddon might be here. So Mr. Haddon, if you want to share.
Perfect.
Anything.
Welcome back.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Mr. Rivera. My comments when I first, or my thoughts when I first saw this S version was that it really doesn't provide any more flexibility than what purchasing currently has because of 72120. And I understand what you're doing is you're moving it up. But my own opinion is I don't think we need this change to the code because we have the flexibility under 72120 to do exactly what you want to do. But I do appreciate your concern to make sure that purchasing is able to support the requirements in an efficient and quick manner, because as we know, without the emergency declaration, if it expires on the 16th for purchasing, it would in some ways hamper things, but I had planned on using 720-120 for those purchases that needed to be expedited. Hopefully that made sense. I'm rambling a little bit.
No, that's good, Ron. Thanks. And we had considered that, and one thing is we wanted to make it a little more clear. We wanted the assembly to have a role in it as well, and not just rely on the mayor. And as we're involved with allocating the funds and so on, so that was kind of one of the reasons to get involved in here. And it's also just nice to consolidate them a bit.
No, Mr. Chair, if I may comment, I do appreciate the consolidation of that. What I'm concerned about is if I have a conflict between, say, A2 and A3, that could potentially happen. And the problem with A3 is we either have to convene a special meeting of the assembly or have to wait 2 weeks.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy, did you have anything else?
Well, yes, I was going to put myself back in the queue, but since you asked, thank you, Chair. I guess I'm really a bit confused because I thought all along we had to have an emergency order, or sorry, an emergency declaration in order to do some of these purchases in a quick and timely manner. And you're telling me that that's not really true, that there was always a kind of a, you know, an additional option there that we just weren't exercising. And so maybe you could explain to me a little bit of difference between what powers, because I'm not looking at the code, so sorry about that. But so what's the difference between the powers that are exempt through an emergency declaration versus the other part of code that you were referring to? Thanks.
Through the chair, if I may, Ms. Kennedy, the difference is the emergency declaration essentially suspends all of Title VII rules. And what the previous 72120 did was on a one-time basis. I could go to the mayor, and if I justified and the mayor approved, then the formal procedures of Title VII could be waived. For example, could waive the 14-day bidding time, or could, in an extreme circumstance, the mayor might approve a sole source if it was in the best interest of the municipality for some life safety health issue that was a one-time purchase. That's the difference between the emergency declaration and what is currently 720-120 of the code. Hopefully that's not a confusing answer.
No, that actually helps. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Gates, did you want to add anything?
Well, I think Mr. Haddon described that really well. And I think that the emergency declaration is more like a blanket exception to Title VII for an emergency that's, you know, a large area-wide, or large area, or large effect in nature. And then this 72090 or 72120 are for those instances. It's an emergency for just this one piece, one part. So maybe a water line breaks and you don't have a contractor, you need to get someone right away, or you have to order a part that you don't have inventory for, and you need it right away, you know, before everything gets flooded, that kind of thing. So that's not something that the mayor would declare an emergency over. So I think that's an example that we had thought of, but it's consistent with Mr. Haddon described.
Great, thank you. Ms. Ennis?
Yes, I do think the title is a little bit confusing because it does say to allow temporary suspension of the rules in order to timely expend federal and state funds, and that's only one of the purposes. That really is in order to timely respond and expend, because what Dean and Ron were talking about is, you know, the current where we can suspend if it's in the best interest. It's not an emergency concern necessarily. So to me, that's a little bit misleading. Maybe we could add a few words in there. And then I have a second point after this. I don't know if I want to do that, or you want to address this one.
Sure. Does anyone want to address that point from Ms. Ennis?
I think that's a valid point. And we evolved, but that was more of the focus of the original ordinance. And with the S, we did kind of direct it a little more crisply to where we wanted it, but broaden it from that title a bit. So I think that's something we can address.
Okay. Yeah, I think we could add 2 words in there and it wouldn't be misleading.
What do you recommend?
I would say, and not change the title so much so that we have a title issue. I would just say in order to timely respond, and would it be and or expend? Maybe and expend. I'd have to think about that. So, but I think we can put a couple words in there and correct that. And let me get back to you about that if I could, Mr. Ottleton.
Sure, thank you.
And then there was one other, Jennifer, I sent to you the suggested modification from Bob Dole. Do you mind sharing that for me? I sent it by email.
Sure, give me just a minute to find it and pull it up.
And Bob Dole, of course, is the incident commander for the Emergency Operations Center. And he was a little concerned that we make it clear that we're not changing FEMA standards, which are reasonable and necessary standards. And so when you see this, the suggested corrections, and I've sent them on to the sponsors. And I'm sorry, I sent them to Dennis early on, but I didn't realize he was being pulled away to the election center. But it basically inserts in the fifth whereas the words necessary and reasonable, and pulls out, deletes as federal and state disaster and economic relief funds are set to be dispersed to communities. So very minor, nuanced corrections or suggested edits, just because he was concerned that FEMA, there, if you can move that down to the fifth whereas. So it's only in the whereas. So you'll see here, the bottom of that whereas clause, we inserted expend relief funds necessary and reasonable. That's the FEMA standard, so their term of art, so just throw that in there. And then he asked if we could take out the initial reference, because this is during this period of transition, which is the FEMA reimbursement sort of period, as federal and state disaster and economic relief funds are set to be dispersed. So again, he was just hesitant that that this was taken by FEMA in any way to be a change of the FEMA standards. So very nuanced edit.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, and that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome back to Mr. Haddon, and thank you for joining. I have a question for you, Mr. Haddon, concerning 7.20.120. Does this, do you have to do it, did you say, or would you just clarify for me, on a contract by contract basis, or does that provide for not a blanket, but multiple instances at once? I mean, each time that someone would want to, seek expedited procurement, then do you have to get a waiver each time?
Through the chair, Ms. LaFrance, historically, that has been the process, that it was on a case-by-case basis. However, what I had intended to do on this case was to expand that sum to just encompass those things that were related to the current pandemic or the federal funds.
Okay, thank you. That helps. And then, Mr. Chair, if I could ask one more question. And this is actually just to members and anyone in the administration concerning the point that Mr. Haddon raised about a potential conflict between A3 and A4, or was it A2 and A3? A2 and A3, sorry, between the mayor's waiver and assembly authorization. I mean, are there thoughts on how to address that? If there's a potential conflict or prevent it, or maybe that's a question for the attorneys, I'm not sure. Thanks.
Can I respond? This is Dee.
Go ahead.
I don't see as much of a conflict, Mr. Haddon, because they're ors. The mayor can do it, or the resolution, or the assembly can do it by resolution versus and.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may comment.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Dee, what I was concerned about is if the mayor waives something and then the assembly comes along later and says, whoops, nope, I didn't want to do that. We shouldn't have done that. Which takes precedence then? I doubt that's going to happen, to be very candid, but you never know in today's environment.
Can I respond, Chair?
Go ahead.
Well, I think they have that power. Don't they have that power now? If the mayor waives and then later reports, that they can then bring some type of separate action and say, we don't agree, we want you to stop this waiver. most of the time it's going to already have occurred.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, this is Ron again. I have no comment on these.
Got it. Mr. Gates?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to note that in A2 and A3, one of other difference between them is A2 for the mayor's waiver. It isn't restricted to the source of funds, so it's a little bit broader in terms of what the mayor can do. And A3 for the Assembly's resolution, it's limited to just federal state grant funds, and those funds have some kind of intent attached to it. So, I mean, I agree with Mr. Haddon that we're not likely to see the conflicts arise. I guess that he's noted there's potential. And I just wanted to note that while the mayor's waivers are a bit broader in scope of what it can do as opposed to the Assembly's resolution there. So I don't think we'll see that kind of conflict come up very much. Usually, our whole government is happy to spend grant funds from the state and federals in accordance with the intent.
Thanks, Mr. Gates. Is there any further discussion?
Yeah, I've got one question for Mr. Haddon.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Ron, on just on the report. So if something is done, we've skipped procurement, and then we get reports, and we do kind of like on the sole source and so on. We get little reports. Is this wording adequate to cover the information that might be useful to kind of reveal, just to make sure that it's all above board and that there wasn't some favoritism or overpayment or anything? Is this something is this adequate, or should we make a checklist of info? What would you recommend?
Mr. Rivera, this is Ron through the chair. I believe that this language is adequate because you're asking for shall include justification for the contracts.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Any other discussion? Otherwise, we will see this on Tuesday. Go ahead, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask if anyone, either from the administration or any members, have any other concerns in areas that we could take some time and work out. I appreciate Ms. Kennedy and Mr. Haddon raising those points and the feedback from Ms. Ennis. And just wanted to make a final ask if anyone has any sections or any concerns about particular sections or just anything in general. I know we're not debating, but just for us, to take another look before the meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'll go ahead, just give it another few seconds, see if anyone else wants to get in the queue. All right, not seeing anyone else in the queue, then we will deliberate this, have a public hearing, and vote on Tuesday. So everyone please come prepared for that. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and close this work session and see everyone again at 2:10 p.m. Thank you.